On today's episode of the Cryptoverse, does Microsoft buying GitHub affect crypto? That's what we're going to talk about today. So, TLDR, Microsoft have officially purchased the company GitHub for $7.5 billion, and they are paying entirely in Microsoft stock. That's it. That's the story. For those of you that want the details, stick around. For those of you that do TLDR, you can bounce out right now. So let's get into the details. First, by setting the scene. So Microsoft are historically famous for what I would call their anti-competitive behavior. They had those antitrust cases. They've historically been, monopolizing the market, shall we say, which they've been largely successful at. And they've been able to largely monopolize the market because of closed source software, which is pretty much how all the software ran for many decades when the PC revolution first started, which Microsoft was a big beneficiary of, right? Becoming the de facto standard operating system. Now, closed source just means that the code that Microsoft programmers wrote is kept private, right? And the ownership of that code is also kept private. It's closed source. So the whole cryptocurrency space, by contrast, is founded on openness and transparency, which is why making a cryptocurrency project open source is pretty much expected as the bare minimum and almost like the cost of entry in this game. So that's historical Microsoft. Now let's talk about Git. It's G-I-T, which oddly enough in the UK is an insult. If someone calls me a Git, that's actually an insult in the UK, so that kind of has a dual meaning for us. But Git, in the sense that we're talking about here, it's a process by which you can keep track of different versions of code, right? So this is critical to prevent, say, the piece of code that you're writing calling from some of the functions of another piece of code that is no longer there in another module because it's been removed. So it's version control system, right? So I can draw an analogy here. It's kind of like having a revision history in your Google Doc. Right, you know that when you're doing a Google Doc, you click revision history, and it shows you all the past versions, who changed what, when, and all that sort of stuff. So Git is a process like that, but it's used by open source software projects. Now, GitHub then is a social network built for the Git process, and it's become the platform where open source projects host their code and then they connect with other programmers to collaborate on coding projects. Now, the beauty of using GitHub for open source software projects in particular is that the concept of a project team has become very fluid. So the code sits there on GitHub, and then programmers who want to work on it come and make their contribution, and the ones that want to stick around, but basically people come and go as they please. The GitHub repository remains the hosting for the code, and then people come and go, make contributions, carry on making contributions or whatever, right? So it's very fluid, but everything's centered around the object of the code itself, not the team, because the team is fluid. It's entirely open, right? Come and go as you please. Now, GitHub is a company, so they make money by charging a monthly hosting fee for either their personal, their organizational, or their enterprise subscription plans. So that's how they make money. Kind of a freemium model. So they do have a free level, but then based on extra features you want and all that kind of stuff, and how much hosting space you want, you can sign up for one of their plans. Now, at this point in the video, you would be forgiven for being confused as to why a company like historical Microsoft would be interested in purchasing a company like GitHub, right? Closed source, open source. And that's the way I've introduced them here. So at this point, you'd be forgiven for thinking, well, that just is like oil and water and it doesn't mix. But the Microsoft of old is not the Microsoft of today. In fact, the current CEO of Microsoft, Satya Nadella, is quoted as saying, quote, "Microsoft is all in on open source," close quote, which they can prove by showing their GitHub contributions. Microsoft as an organization has 2 million contributions committed to projects on GitHub, making them one of the most active organizations on GitHub as a network, which is quite surprising, isn't it? That Microsoft have made that many contributions to software projects. Now, what you also might find interesting is that based on the figures that I've seen, and that I will link to in the show notes, is that GitHub as a company are running at a loss. Like most technology companies, but they are one of them. So in their financial year ending 2016, they generated $95 million in revenue, but made a loss of $27 million. And that's after being in business for 8 years. So they started in about 2008. So in 2018, they're about 10 years old. However, these figures are from 2016 when they were 8 years old. And again, because GitHub is a private company, they don't have to disclose their figures. So these numbers come from this Bloomberg article that was claiming they had some leaked numbers. So this is not a primary source by any means. So, take that with a pinch of salt. Like I said a minute ago, GitHub, like many technology companies, they're able to sustain these kinds of losses because they've raised $350 million through various rounds of investment capital. So they just have this bag of money and then they're burning through it gradually in the hopes of creating a sustainable business model at some point. But you can't sustain that kind of a loss forever. And as you'll see from the chart I'm going to put up on screen right now, it shows how quickly they are burning through their pile of cash. It shows their burn rate and how the burn rate is accelerating as they try and get more and more into these larger organizations for their enterprise products, right? Actually, when you consider a large portion of their revenues, it comes from, and their growth, a large part of it is coming from their enterprise offerings, it makes sense why, they would want to sell to a company like Microsoft. And by contrast, why a company like Microsoft would want to buy a company like GitHub, right? Principally, Microsoft already have clients in the enterprise software sector. So it's much easier for a Microsoft sales rep who has an existing relationship with someone he's already selling to kind of go for a review meeting and then upsell them to some kind of GitHub solution rather than GitHub cold calling and trying to get in the door in the first place. That's very, very difficult for enterprise software. So GitHub have also largely benefited from being pretty much the only provider in this space for many years. Now there's others creeping in now, but they've had a pretty big head start on a lot of their fellow competitors. And of course, Microsoft also, probably want access to the developer community so they can mine the data basically and see what software is trending so they know what products to build and things like that. We're in a world where data is a new currency basically. It's the new commodity, it's the new gold, it's the new thing of value. So Microsoft isn't buying the revenue stream clearly because they're making huge losses, not huge losses, but losses nonetheless. Microsoft are going to be acquiring other kinds of value that they see, like access to the developer community, but more importantly, access to the GitHub data, of all the projects and what people are working on, what languages they're using, all that kind of stuff is very, very valuable data indeed. So in conclusion, in terms of whether this really affects crypto, I would say yes, in the sense that the crypto project communities, they're looking to move away from GitHub as a result of this news. So the crypto community being kind of decentralized, anti-corporate, transparent, all the rest of it, a lot of the crypto projects have taken issue with Microsoft in particular buying GitHub. So out of principle, a lot of these projects are starting to talk about moving away from GitHub to a different platform. There are other providers like GitLab is one, or Keybase is another one, which is more crypto oriented. And there's some of the alternatives that are being considered. GitLab is probably the number one alternative to GitHub. So if you want to follow this ongoing conversation on Twitter, there's a trending hashtag. It's moving to GitLab, all one word. And if you plug that into Twitter, you'll be able to tune into the ongoing conversation from all the projects that are reacting to this news and have decided, no thank you, we're not interested in operating or using a GitHub owned by Microsoft. So interesting news. So we'll see how this goes. I can understand why the crypto community has responded this way, because they just don't see principally the historical Microsoft being in line with the principles of the crypto community. Despite the fact that what Microsoft have been doing in recent history, it's just they've got too long a history of being a corporate bully to win over the developer community so lightly. So we'll see how this pans out. And that's all I've got for you today. So if you liked this episode, go ahead, hit the like button. If you disliked it, hit the dislike button. Please leave me a comment below with some feedback and get subscribed. And also, because I'm now being barred from the banking system, if you would be able to find some spare change in your crypto wallet to donate, you can check that out in the show notes as well. If you don't know what I'm talking about, look back on my channel and you'll find out how there's a bit of a blockade to prevent me from funding my organization and sharing information like this with you. So go check that out and you'll see what I'm talking about. Other than that, guys, I will be back with the next episode of the Cryptoverse. So until then, it's me, Chris Coney, saying bye for now.